And now it's my pleasure to welcome Ellen Miller. And Ellen is the person who suggested this program to us. She actually knew Marco, and she also knew Jeremy, and she brought it to us, and we're really glad to be able to do it. Ellen has lived and worked in the Valley for over 30 years. She's the first American woman to summit Mount Everest from both sides, Nepal and Tibet, in 2001 and 2002. Her climbing resume includes 8,000-meter peaks and peaks around the world. In her former endurance racing career, she competed on Team Vail, Echo Challenge, multi-day, multi-sport events, and races across the globe, and she still enjoys competing in athletics. She's creator of Climb for Literacy, which encourages children to learn climbing while helping other less fortunate children, and she is also co-founder of the Vail Mountain Winter Uphill event, and she has managed and coached the U.S. women's mountain running team for the past 16 years. So it's my pleasure to welcome Ellen, who's going to introduce Jeremy. Thank you so much.
I want to thank everybody for coming out on this very cold and snowy night. Thank you for making a trek here to this amazing venue. We're so honored to be presenting here because it's a special historical place in Vail. Before I introduce Jeremy, I want to give you a little background. I had the pleasure of knowing Marco Siffredi, who is the subject of the program tonight. Marco and I had a very unlikely friendship. At the time we met, I was about 40 years old, and he was about 21. And we met on a big high peak in Tibet called Cho Oyu on our first expedition, and I had heard about this kid that wanted to snowboard down 8,000-meter peak, so I was kind of fascinated. But immediately we bonded because I speak French, and oftentimes on mountaineering expeditions, there's a lot of languages, but maybe many people don't speak your specific language. So it was because of the French language, Marco and I bonded in a unique way. Now remember, he was 21 years old and I was 40. So in his eyes, I'm an old lady, So I was very touched by the friendship that we developed during that first expedition. And then we went on the next year to climb Mount Everest together. And whenever you climb Mount Everest with anybody, it creates a very, very strong friendship bond. And I was intrigued, I was nervous when I first got Jeremy's email. About 3 years ago, he emailed me and he said, "My name is Jeremy Evans and I'm working on this book about Marco Siffredi," and I could feel my heart kind of doing a somersault because I guess the feelings I had were very protective towards Marco. I just wanted to make sure that this book author was going to do my friend justice. Marco did not live a long life, but he lived a bright life. And I don't remember Marco as being one of the best snowboarders in the world. I don't remember him being one of the best mountain climbers I've ever seen in the world. What I remember about Marco was respect and kindness and love and friendship. And I'll just share with you one story that really defines my relationship with Marco that is just emblazoned in my memory forever. Summit day on Mount Everest, the north side from Tibet, 2001. And we all knew Marco had this dream to snowboard off the summit of Mount Everest. And Marco was incredibly skilled and incredibly fast in the mountains. So he and Prabhatashi Sherpa were way ahead of the rest of the team on summit day. They were so fast, they got up to the summit and literally sat there in the dark and had to wait, until the sun came up for Marco to snowboard off. But about the time the sun is coming up, I'm approaching the final summit pyramid of Mount Everest, and I look up. And here he comes, a bright purple suit, oxygen mask, big down suit, his ice axe, and he arcs these beautiful turns pretty much right in front of us. And he snowboards right up to in front of me, sits down, pulls down his oxygen mask and his big toothy grin, and he says, "Bonjour Hélène, comment ça va?" Which is like, "Hello Ellen, how's it going?" And I'm up there, I'm at like 28,600 feet or whatever. I'm like not breathing really well. I'm halfway hypoxic. I'm freezing. And this kid is having the time of his life, but it was the fact that he stopped to cheer me on. Ellen, you can do this. We've got this. Isn't this beautiful? Isn't this great? He had that kind of enthusiasm. And that's the Marco that I remember is just so loving and kind and wonderful. And I want to say, Jeremy, not only are you've done a beautiful job with your book telling his story, but you've really told it with dignity. You know, you've really honored him. You've really captured who he was, as opposed to just his athletic achievements. So without further ado, I'm going to read Jeremy's bio because I don't want to make any mistakes. Jeremy lives in South Lake Tahoe, California. He's lived there for the past 21 winters. He is a former collegiate soccer player, and he graduated from Marquette University in 2000 with a degree in journalism. Jeremy worked for the next 8 years as a sports writer for several daily newspapers, and he won numerous awards for his writing from the California Newspaper Publishers Association and the Nevada Press Association. His first book, interestingly for this crowd, is called In Search of Powder, the story of America's disappearing ski bum. And that was published and reviewed by numerous outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and ESPN. He had a teaching career at Lake Tahoe Community College and South Tahoe High School. And along the way, he wrote his second book, The Battle for Paradise, which is about a surf town in Costa Rica trying to save its world-famous waves from potentially destructive tuna farming. So I find that fascinating. I can't wait to read that, Jeremy. Jeremy himself is an avid snowboarder and climber, mountaineer, and he began these activities right after he moved to Lake Tahoe. He's been all around the world in search, those activities in your writing have taken you all over the world. And like many people who live in resort towns for 2 decades, Jeremy has multiple professions, which many of us can relate to. So when he's not working on his next writing project, he enjoys being the head men's and women's soccer coach at Lake Tahoe Community College. He lives in Tahoe with his wife Izzy and their 2 daughters. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you. Thank you for coming to Vail.
Well, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm Jeremy Evans. Thanks for that great introduction by Ellen Miller. I feel obviously a little embarrassed, actually, because Ellen's the real star here, and Marco's the real star, and all of you are the real stars for being here. Certainly thanks to Chris and the whole Vail Symposium for putting this on and having me. It's been a great trip across the Great Basin. I spent some time in Salt Lake City doing some snowboarding, and then been here in Vail. And maybe I'm the reason why snow came, because we didn't have snow in Tahoe for a good month and a half. So I know it was very difficult because of the weather and getting here. So I do appreciate that you're here. So thank you for being here on this special event. It's also difficult because this book came out in May during a pandemic. We're still in the pandemic. And I haven't done any live presentations like this. I've done a few podcasts and stuff online and stuff like that, but it's great to actually be interacting with people face to face, and so I do thank you for being here for that, because I think it's a more intimate kind of experience. And we're going to try to wrap things up by 7 o'clock, and that way it gives ample time for you to ask any questions of Ellen or myself, of Marco, because I want to obviously give you your due for being here. Ellen referenced a conversation we had when I first started this book, and I'm a teacher now, and I've taught at the community college level and the high school level, so I kind of meander a little bit, and I'll try to give you just a little idea of what I'll do here today. And I'll tell you just the background of how I wrote this book, because Marco did disappear in 2002. He was the first person in history to make the first complete snowboard descent of Mount Everest in 2001. So what the heck are you waiting 20 years to write the book about, right? So, I mean, there is a bit of a story there. For me, I got out of college at Marquette University and moved to the Lake Tahoe area. And interesting enough, I first heard about this story in 2001. I was at the sports writing desk, and we had what's called the Associated Press Wire, and stories would come in regularly. And I was sitting at the desk one day in 2001, and it came across, French snowboarder versus snowboard Everest. And I just got into climbing a little bit myself. Just did basically snow walk-ups, Mount Rainier, Mount Whitney, stuff, Cascades, Sierra Nevada type stuff, and then learned how to snowboard as well that first winter in Lake Tahoe. And so when I read this story about this French guy that was basically a couple years younger than me, he was born in 1979, I was born in 77, I just thought he was about the coolest thing possible, right? He wasn't like an idol by any means, but definitely there was admiration there. The other interesting part was, we're going back 20 years where the internet was much different than it is today. I had an AOL email account where basically you try to load an email, hit return, go in the kitchen, make a quesadilla, come back, and maybe your email's loaded, right? And so that's kind of what I was dealing with when I read this story about Marco snowboarding Mount Everest. And there just wasn't much written about him. And one, I wanted to kind of think about, well, maybe it's because of the slow internet, there's just not much out there. And then as I came to learn after speaking with Ellen and others, it was kind of by design. He really was a talented snowboarder, but he did not snowboard for the reasons that you might think he would. So that was kind of something interesting that I'll talk a little bit more about. And then about a year later, 2002, in September 2002, I'm sitting at that same desk at that same newspaper in Carson City, Nevada, and another story comes across that the same French snowboarder has now disappeared on a different route on the north face of Mount Everest. And at that time, got even more intrigued and just simply could not get any more information on him. But at the same time, I had just started climbing more. I booked my first of 5 trips to Peru, to South America, Aconcagua, things in Argentina, and I just kept going about my business and just learning how to snowboard and learning how to be in the mountains. And he really did, not that he was an afterthought that I didn't care about him, but just I couldn't learn much about him. There wasn't written much about him in American magazines. He wasn't in competitions, and he just kind of remained like a memory, if you will. So I go through my journalism career. I kind of see the writing on the wall there that I'm probably going to be, I was laid off after getting back from the X Games in Aspen. I was covering for my newspaper group. And I went back and got my master's in teaching, and my wife's a teacher, so I really appreciate those summers off. I thought it would help me climb, not realizing how hard teachers actually work, so that was an error on my part. And wrote my first book on the disappearing ski bum, just kind of changing American ski town, and then for some reason stepped out of that and decided to go hang out in Central America a lot and write about this surf town. And not that it wasn't, I guess it's for lack of a better phrase, my bread and butter. I kind of was more at home in snow in the mountains. And I just was, after my second book, kind of out of ideas. I was a high school teacher at the time. Prep periods, if you're a teacher, or if you know a teacher, are kind of gold, You get to recharge your batteries, maybe grade papers. But for me, it started to make me realize, well, I want to write another book. What do I write about? And I don't know what it was. But something at that moment, I just wondered, whatever happened to Marco Siffredi? And I don't know why I thought that, it kind of just came across. Probably because all my friends were texting me from the resorts in Tahoe telling me what I'm missing, as it's 12:30 p.m. when I'm grading papers, and I should be on the mountain. And I just started connecting with some people that maybe might know about his story. And one of which, that was kind of a long way to say, I emailed Ellen. And my wife's family is in Arizona. I like my in-laws plenty, but enough is enough sometimes. And I came up to Colorado, and I remember emailing Ellen asking her if she'd be willing to speak. And this was tough for me because Ellen's highly accomplished, and you never know with these athletes sometimes. Like, you're emailing me, Ellen Miller, who's done this, this, and this, and you want to talk about somebody else? Like, who are you? And so I was really, she was wondering, like, am I the right person to write this book? And I'm wondering, like, oh my gosh, like, she's going to be receptive to this. And we met, a few miles down I-70 at a coffee shop in Edwards, I believe. And I walked out of that meeting was more a conversation, like, whoa, I'm blown away. There is a book here. There is a character here, because as we go through the various slides tonight, you'll see you have this one image of Marco Siffredi, right? And then as you speak to people like Ellen and speak to his family and friends, you get a more of a complete picture. And so I think that's a really important part as we go through all these slides. And because this is the first live presentation I've done, there are some hiccups here. It's not the Vail Symposium's part, it's my fault. We have a presentation. So what we'll probably do here is I'll first show a book trailer that we put together, ahead of the release that kind of gives a little synopsis of Marco, gives you a little glimpse. And then I have a series of video clips that I got from his friend Bertrand, who was on Ellen's first climb of the 8,000 meter peak of Choyu when she met them. And he was really gracious, and so he made a film about Marco quite a while back. And the film in French stands for shooting star, and that really was what Marco was, a shooting star. Very bright, very special, but just did not last long, right? And so I thought it was a very apt name. And so for those clips, because they're not like embedded perfectly in the PowerPoint presentation, I'm gonna do that manually. And then at the end, I have like a little photo collage and a song, and then we'll kind of do some question and answer after that. One thing about the video clips, other than the one, we're going to have some rare clips of him actually succeeding in 2001 on Mount Everest, some of his last final hours, if you will, when he disappeared in 2002, and then some other ones along the way. Is obviously he speaks in French, so there are English subtitles, but they're smaller and yellow, and it's just really, I apologize in advance if people in the back or even the front won't be able to detect what he's saying. But I will say, in the one clip in 2001 when he is successful snowboarding down Mount Everest, that's all in English the whole time. So, I mean, at least you get some of that. And so I just think it's visually an important story to kind of see, because you get this idea of, well, you're snowboarding down Vail Mountain, and now you're snowboarding down Everest. And what is that like? And for me personally, when I started researching this book about Marco, I had been to, my favorite climbing area is called the Cordillera Blanca in Peru, and Marco had visited there. And I mean, he's climbing and snowboarding down peaks. I'm barely struggling to get up the normal route, and he's doing all these other types of routes. And so that's where kind of some of the admiration for myself toward Marco developed at that point. And so I'm nowhere near the level of Ellen, of Marco, anything like that. Like I would like to fancy myself more than a recreational climber, but I've done a half dozen trips to South America. I haven't climbed above 8,000 meters. But I have been a sports writer for a long time, and I have interviewed and interacted with a lot of big time athletes. And the story that I learned about Marco made him seem as like special and as elite as any of those. So I think what I'll start off first with is, this is the book trailer here. It's just a couple minutes and just kind of gives a synopsis of how this story came to be, and you get your first kind of glimpses of Marco. But before I do that, I always try to do a little exercise about this. Before you heard about this evening, or me, or this book, can you raise your hand if you had heard anything about Marco Siffredi in your life? Anybody? Nice and high. Okay, a handful, that's good. And definitely raise your hand if you had no idea who Marco Siffredi was. All right, okay, good. That's not surprising. There are people I've come across in ski towns. There's a very famous accomplished snowboarder named Jeremy Jones, that he's based out of Truckee, California, near Lake Tahoe, and he had heard about him. And in a different conversation with another pro snowboarder, I was just equally as convinced they would have heard about Marco, had no idea who Marco was. And same thing, there's a pro skier out of Aspen named Chris Davenport. I had to interview him for something, and he had climbed Everest, and he knew all about Marco. Go to one of his close friends, asked him if he knew anything about Marco, had no idea about Marco, right? And so for me, this was astonishing because of what Marco accomplished. But once you get to know him a little bit, know his story a little bit, it's probably not surprising you haven't heard about him, because the fame, the limelight, all that was not part of his programming at all. Now, as I go through the various clips, I'll kind of talk about his frustrations, because when you go to climb 8,000 meter peaks, it does get expensive. Certainly, someone's got to foot the bill if it's not that person themselves. And so he did grow some frustration by the end of his career. And I say the end of his career because obviously it was not a long career, that people were getting notoriety and getting things that he wasn't. He was not jealous of them, but he was wondering, why are they getting things I'm not getting when I'm kind of more accomplished? But he never said that publicly, and he would never do that, because that's not why he snowboarded. He really was snowboarding for the purity of the sport. So I'm just gonna go ahead and play this real quick. There is some music to it. I mean, the audio should be okay. And then, because like I said, the hiccups with the PowerPoint, it'll kind of make sense, and we'll go through these slides. And like I said, hopefully by 7 o'clock we're done, and you can get engaged with the conversation, because I'm sure that's really what you'd like to be here for, and to ask Ellen some questions.
Marco, you ready to go?
Technical
les débuts de l'arrêt ouest.
Hi Marco! Hey Booba!
One night in 2002, while working as a journalist, I read a story about a 23-year-old French snowboarder named Marco Siffredi, who had climbed, snowboarded, and then mysteriously disappeared from Earth's highest point, Mount Everest. Hundreds of climbers have died on Everest, but nobody has really disappeared. Why did Marco? As a snowboarder and climber of a similar age, Marco was certainly a beacon for activities I'd become drawn to, but since not much had been written about him in English, he mostly remained a stranger for almost 2 decades. 15 years later, in 2017, now as an author searching for new ideas, I randomly thought, whatever happened to Marco Siffredi on Everest? I ended up answering a far more important question. Who was Marco Siffredi? Speaking with Marco's friends and family became part of a 3-year quest to tell the first English-language narrative about Marco's life. Marco didn't obsess over securing sponsorships, he didn't obsess over winning competitions, and he didn't obsess over gaining fame. What he obsessed over was simple and pure: climb mountains and snowboard down them. But on September 8, 2002, he became the central figure in Everest's most intriguing mystery in nearly a century. In telling the story of Marco's disappearance, I am confident he and his family will feel that I accurately encapsulated the story of their son, the story of their brother, and the story of the special person who left us too soon.
Okay, yeah, so that's just this, a little synopsis of the book. It's called See You Tomorrow. See, I'm really horrible about selling books. My wife always gives me a hard time. I know some of you have purchased books. There are books for purchase, and I'll be signing some of them here. I can think over by the piano when I'm done. And selling books sounds great, really, but I really get engrossed in my topics and the subjects. So I think you'll probably, see that. About me, you learn a little bit through my introduction with Ellen. Author, parent, snowboarder, coach. I think parent really is the most important one, maybe for this story. And when Jeremy, why are you writing about something that happened 20 years ago? I think maybe it was written in the stars. I had to wait a little bit longer until I became a parent in 2009, and then obviously a parent in 2011 with the birth of my second daughter, because I don't think if you don't have that parental viewpoint and lens, I don't know if you can pull this book off. And I never would have thought about that when I started out writing. Had I written about Marco in 2005, when I was brash and young and I thought I knew everything in Tahoe, it would have been a disservice to Marco. And I think maybe it just was waiting for me, with fate. Just like with Marco, with fate, you don't get to choose fate, fate chooses you. And I think maybe it's just the right time for me to write this book. Because of the fact, Marco, when he was 18 months old, he lost his oldest brother died in an avalanche. So his parents, his dad was a mountain guide. They're from Chamonix, France, which is a mountain valley, similar to Vail, very mountain culture. It's not unusual to meet mothers in Chamonix that have lost loved ones, particularly boys, it seems like. And so the Siffredi family obviously was not vaccinated from that, from that situation. So Marco never knew his oldest brother, who was buried in the Chamonix cemetery. And raise your hand if you've been to Chamonix, anybody? Okay, good, more people than from Marco. I was always fascinated just visiting the cemetery there, and actually in the book itself, I write about that cemetery, because you'll notice something a little unique as you start to walk through there. I'm always fascinated. I'm not morbid by any means, but I like to walk through cemeteries because they're kind of beautiful places. And I think you learn a lot about all towns. My grandmother grew up in a place called Ritzville, Washington, in eastern Washington, in a small town of 1,000, and I could hang out in that cemetery because I just think you learn so much about a town. And with Chamonix, you start to notice, wow, there's a lot of young people that die here, 20s, 30s. Certainly there's people that grow to be older, but you just notice a little disturbing trend. So their relationship in Chamonix with death is a little bit, that was something I had to write about in the book that I wasn't quite sure if I was doing a good job with it, but it's certainly there and present. And so with Marco, his father was a mountain guide, And he grew up skiing like a lot of people here, obviously in Vail, or if they're in Tahoe or Jackson Hole. He didn't really take to skiing so much. I mean, he could do it. He was adequate. I'm sure he was a phenomenal skier in his own right. But he didn't learn to snowboard until he was 16. So he picks up a snowboard by 1995, 1996, and within a year or two, he's on the Aiguille du Midi, and he's doing the most difficult routes in an area that has the most difficult routes really in the world. And then again, at the same time in Chamonix, there's a lot of people like Marco that are young, they're talented, they're dangerous, in many ways, and they're doing things, and they end up in that cemetery a lot because they're really pushing the boundaries. Marco is an interesting one in that, similar to maybe like, this is kind of dating me a little bit. You have posters of Michael Jordan or Larry Bird or Magic Johnson or today's young people, LeBron James. His idols and the people he looked up to were mountain people that were doing dangerous things. But he didn't enjoy skiing and he didn't enjoy climbing. His father, who I got to know his family a bit to write this book, there's no way you could write this book without their blessing. He explained to me that Marco did not like climbing at all, which was amazing because he became a very fast, very competent climber. He just kind of did that one the whole time and was whining the whole time, and he didn't really get good at it until he wanted to do it. And I think that was one thing about Marco, and probably like a lot of people, is if you force someone to do it, they're not going to do it. But when he picked up a snowboard, it kind of just coalesced with him becoming a teenager and really coming of age. And he met a friend, a guy named Philip Forte, who was his best friend. And that's where he learned to climb, how he did rope work, and how he just kind of recreated in the mountains. Well, after a year of learning how to snowboard, roughly over a year, his friend Philip Forte died in an avalanche at the Grand Monte ski area outside Chamonix. So this idea of death in the mountains was not unique to Marco. It was surrounding him. It didn't mean he had a death wish. I would just kind of say he had a life wish. And you have a lot of people in Chamonix that, yes, they know that death is out there. It's almost an abstract concept, but they really do try to live life to the fullest. But their risk factor, Marco was doing things. He's done first descents that have not been repeated since. He's done descents that maybe one or two people have done. And I've talked to a lot of people that they're convinced that Marco did a lot of descents that no one even knows about, just because he would do things. When Philip Forte, his best friend, died, he really had no one else to go on the mountains with. He had another best friend named Bertrand, who made the film about Marco, and he was getting into more of his studies, and he just couldn't drop everything to go snowboarding with Marco. Marco always wanted to go snowboarding. And so he spent a lot of time in the mountains. Well, the important thing is, how do you go from picking up a snowboard at 16, right, to standing on top of Mount Everest within a few years? And it is an interesting trajectory because a lot of people will think, well, I'm going to show you the last moments before he disappears. He did not skip rungs of the ladder. His progression was very, very fast, but he did a lot of things in the Alps, and then he went to South America and did lots of things there. He did a 7,000-meter peak outside Kathmandu called Dorje Lakpa, and he was successful there, and it just kept giving him the confidence, like, I can do this, I can do this. And then he wanted to do his first 8,000-meter peak, and he contacted a gentleman named Russell Bryce, who was one of the preeminent Everest expedition leaders who was living in Argentière at the time, a nearby town of Chamonix. And his dad, Marco's father, was just getting sick and tired of his son saying, I want to snowboard Everest, I want to snowboard Everest. And finally the dad just said, if you want to snowboard Everest, you got to contact Russell Bryce. And so Marco just kind of cold called Russell Bryce one day and asked him to meet with them. And Russell Bryce was kind of taken aback, like, oh my gosh, I don't know what this kid's talking about. And so it's not that he just ended up on September 8, 2002, on top of the north face of Mount Everest, and he disappears a little bit later. A lot of people want to label him as he was too aggressive, he had a death wish, he didn't go through all the various steps, but that's just not accurate. And what I learned a lot during my research is he was very calculative. He did all the research. He was a mountain junkie. He read about everybody who did that route, their conditions. He would knock on people's doors in Chamonix and ask them, information. He was always trying to get information about his climbs. So he didn't just end up on September 8, 2002, on top of Mount Everest trying to do the Hornbein Couloir. And so that's where he ultimately disappeared. That's obviously the setting of my book. It's named after American Tom Hornbein, who in 1963 was part of the first Everest expedition, American Everest expedition. And he kind of went off that Everest expedition and went and explored the west ridge of Everest, and then obviously found the couloir that's named after him in the Hornbein Couloir. This route is a beautiful route, and Marco first got attracted to it because one of his childhood idols said it was the most beautiful line in the world, and he wanted to go there and honor him at some point. He did that same, he had that same mentality. I'm kind of giving you a little intro of some of these clips just in case they don't come across in the English subtitles. There's a route called the Mont Blanc on a peak called Aiguille Verte in Chamonix Valley. And that route, when he did that in 1999, in June of 1999, that's what really put Marco on the map. Where even in Chamonix, they were like, this guy's legit, this guy's real. It has not been, it's been repeated one time since, and he was the first snowboard descent. It didn't get done, it first got done in 1989. He did it 10 years later in 1999, and then it didn't really happen again for another decade or so by a skier. So he had done very, very difficult routes in the Alps, obviously very difficult routes in the Andes, difficult routes in the Himalaya, and he proved that he could snowboard at high altitude. Okay, so this clip right here is those last moments before he disappears. So we'll kind of go through each of the various things that maybe could have happened to him, but just to give a scale of maybe how exhausted he was, the conditions he was facing. On September 8th, when he was successful climbing the second time in 2 years, it took him over 12 hours. He was climbing through waist-deep snow. The conditions were much different than in 2001 that Ellen was mentioning, that he buzzed up there with the Sherpas, and Purbatashi was like his main climbing Sherpa, who became a close friend of Marco's. And he was kind of amazed by Marco's skill, ability, strength, endurance during those climbs. And so the whole calculus, everything was a bit different from 2002 to 2001. But I just want to kind of go through this clip. We'll talk about some of the theories that happened to him. Essentially, he got to the summit at about 2:15 p.m., hung out there for about an hour in pretty calm weather. I mean, there were some clouds billowing around, but there was no storms. Certainly there's never a safe time to snowboard Mount Everest, but if there was a time to snowboard Mount Everest, that would be in the safest conditions possible. And he started down, and the Sherpas were going down the North Ridge route, and he was obviously hanging a left to go find the top of the Hornbein Couloir. And then he was going to meet a yak herder about 17,500 feet. There was a tent set up for him at the glacier below, and he never showed up. That's essentially just what happened. There was another French climber waiting for him, or viewing him from advanced base camp, and they saw the tracks come down. Clouds kind of surrounded him, shrouded him. Clouds broke up, and they never saw him again. Okay, and so they knew by the afternoon that something was going on. There's all sorts of reasons, all sorts of things Marco probably would have done differently that day. But certainly the reason why it's a mysterious disappearance is kind of going back to that book trailer, is lots of people have died on Everest, and lots of bodies are never recovered. But he really just essentially vanished in that there's no piece of clothing, there's no snowboard, there was nothing of him after that day around about 3:15 p.m. on September 8, 2002. And that's a little unique because people did look for him. Russell Bryce, who kind of became a father figure to him, he was on a different mountain at the time. He got over there and tried to lead just kind of a search expedition. He looked for him for the next 7-8 years from the North Pole and really tried to figure out what exactly could have happened. And there is no discernible thing because there's no body and there's no evidence. And so the theories range, we'll go through those theories, but it's not as simple as like, oh, well, he's a 23-year-old snowboarding off Mount Everest. What do you think was going to happen? It's not that simple because he got there twice in 2 years, and he was probably the most accomplished big mountain snowboarder, talented snowboarder in the world. And if anybody could pull it off, it would have been him because he did it the previous year. So I just wanted to make that clear in this whole talk of Marco, is that even though he looks a certain way, really beneath that is a calculative, humble, smart, skillful, brave, compassionate. I mean, all these kind of adjectives that don't seem like they kind of almost are in contrast to his visual appearance. It's all there. And that's what kind of makes his story pretty interesting, is that I learned a lot through Ellen when we first spoke, and then obviously in the research for this book. So here's the last little bit, and then I kind of tie in this last little clip on September 8, 2002.
Hi Marco!
Hey Papa!
Where are now?
No, Everest, but tired this time, huh? Lot of snow.
Summit! How many hours?
14, no?
Okay, see you. See you tomorrow. Take care.
So that's, sorry, I'm not great at this. So those are the last images. Now a little bit below that, to go down that ridge, he did cross the ropes again, the fixed ropes with a Sherpa, and then he hung a left. Basically a repeat of his route in 2001 down the Hornbein Couloir, and then he had to keep traversing all the way across the north face to the top of the Hornbein Couloir, and we'll talk about some of the technical aspects there. So there are a couple more images which you'll see at the very end of this, but that really was him about an hour after reaching the summit. When he first reached the summit, he was very tired. And Purbatashi was concerned because this was not the type of Marco he remembered from the previous year. So he knew something was not quite right. Yes, he was exhausted. Yes, he seemed very obsessed, overdoing it that time. But if you think about most successful people, they tend to be pretty obsessive in their pursuits. And so that obviously applies to Marco as well. Purba did try to have a chat with them and say, hey, we think you should not do this. You know, let's turn around. And he just wasn't having it that day. He was committed to going. You know, he's really committed to doing the Hornbein Couloir. So here are the various theories, and I think this is the interesting thing, and there's been some interesting barroom conversations with a lot of my friends and family members and people that have read the book. So the first one, they say, well, it was snowing. You know, it was snowing. There was pretty horrible weather leading up in the post-monsoon season, you know, of August and September. You know, could he have died in an avalanche? And of course, that's going to be, it's always going to be there, right? Now, it didn't really snow a lot in the 24 hours of his climb. So while the avalanche risk is never going to be zero, it was probably the lowest for a descent of this magnitude. The other thing about the avalanche is the next day and the next few days when Russell Bryce and other people went to go check out maybe what happened and investigate the incident, is there's no crowning. You know, a really big avalanche, there would be a crowning. I mean, of course, we're talking an enormous north face of Mount Everest, but there were no signs of an avalanche. And they just saw his tracks ended at 28,215 feet, and then they just ended, right? Nothing more. He was wearing yellow that day. Yellow was not seen. So you certainly could have the idea that, well, maybe an avalanche swept him away and then took him down the north face of Mount Everest, and his body was discarded from there. The problem is the yak herder, 17,500 feet, had no reports of a major avalanche, didn't hear anything. If it was a big avalanche, there would have been remnants of that. People would have heard about it. So there was no visual evidence of an avalanche in that section of the mountain. Okay, a crevasse, right? You know, a hole, a slit in the glacier. That's always another one. Well, there was a woman named Elizabeth Hawley who, you know, she died recently, but she was an Everest chronicler, or Himalaya, if you will. And she was very mesmerized by the Marco story too, but she made it very clear right away when someone brought up, well, maybe he fell in a crevasse. Well, that would be certainly plausible because it's dangerous to doing things on a glacier anywhere there's crevasses by yourself. But there are no crevasses located in that part of the mountain, on that part of the mountain where his tracks disappeared. So certainly if he got swept away or actually went further down the mountain than his tracks ended, he could have fallen in a crevasse. But at that point, up on the high north face of Mount Everest, there are no crevasses for him to fall into. Exhaustion. I think all of these things are probably leading to a likely scenario for him. So he was exhausted. It took almost 14 hours. You probably heard that, you know, on the clip. And he was visibly tired to the point that Purba thought that he should turn around. But after about an hour on the summit, his energy seemed to return. He seemed like more of the old Marco. And I don't know if you're ever physically fit to snowboard, you know, from over 8,000 meters after climbing 14 hours. But exhaustion probably would tie in because when you think about all the other elements that could happen to him, you can make bad decisions. Your body could, you know, give out on you essentially. So most people think there's some kind of accident. His father, who I got to speak with, this is where it gets really tough. You want to have sister talk and you want to have father talk, is most people think that whatever happened to him happened quickly. You know, the day he went, there was probably about 12 to 18 inches of fresh snow. I mean, that's going to be heaven for a snowboarder like Marco. He's not going to be troubled. The slopes right below Everest, where his tracks ended, is about 30 degrees. I mean, there's stuff in the back bowls that are steeper than that, right? And so he would not be troubled by that terrain. It doesn't mean a split-second thing. Couldn't have done something, a little slough even, going back to the avalanche idea. He wasn't wearing a helmet, as kind of per the time, 20 years ago. So there could have been some kind of accident. Hypothermia, he was on oxygen. This is an important part, is he climbed with oxygen, but snowboarding down, he did not like the oxygen apparatus, the mask on, but he would stop periodically, breathe oxygen, and then he would take it off and keep snowboarding. So there's certainly a chance that if he had complications with his oxygen tank, that hypothermia could set in, certainly at that altitude and that temperature. According to Purbatashi, the Sherpa that was with him, he did replace his oxygen tank with a full one. So when he left the summit at 3:15, he had a full one. That would have lasted him a long time, at that regular flow. So certainly hypothermia could happen regardless, but it seems like if whatever happened to him, oxygen and hypothermia probably wouldn't have been it. Hypoxia, just the shortness, well, we all know a lot about being hypoxic. I mean, your brain is starving for oxygen up there. If something were to happen to him where his oxygen was malfunctioning, then something that could lead to obviously poor decision making. It could lead to hypothermia. His father thinks that he made it to the top of the Hornbein Couloir, sat down, and never got back up. Now, who am I to argue with his father, right? I'm just listening to what dad is saying, and I'm just showing utmost respect. But everybody else I talked to that knew anything about Marco said there's no way he would sit down and let death come to him. He would have done something. He would have got up and done something, right? So that's not to refute the father's theory. It's just based on all the character traits that I learned. He might have sat down for a little bit, collected himself, and then something would have happened from there. And then obviously the last one, and this is the most romantic thing, and you have to give it some, credibility, is that did he succeed in slipping into society and slipping in Tibet and no one heard from him again? Now, people chuckle, and I chuckle too because it doesn't seem plausible at all. But as you get to learn about Marco, if there was ever somebody on this earth that would do that, Marco Siffredi would do that. And I will say, I'm really bad. Now I'm bad about selling books. I'm bad about giving too much in the book. I say this is kind of some original reporting in the book, as I connected with the Russian expedition that was there the year after in 2003 and 2004 in that area, and they did find a snowboard at 17,500 feet in 2003 that nobody knows how that snowboard got there. And if that was Marco's snowboard, it's written about in the book, then he did make it down and something happened. So I'll give you that little kind of one right like that. So one thing I like to do is, so this is an early image of Marco. So you're starting to think a little bit, okay, who is this guy? And I just call it the makings of a legend, because certainly he picked up a snowboard by 16 and then he progressed really, really quickly. So these are the ones that have the English subtitles, so I really apologize if you can't see them toward the back, but we'll go through a series of these clips, and I'll kind of talk about each one as we go. But I just kind of labeled this one the makings of a legend.
Ça fait 4 ans que je pratique le snow. Avant je skiais, mais je skiais pas trop, un peu hors piste sur les... J'étais jeune un peu. Brévent, surtout Brévent Grand Montagne, mais pas trop aiguille. Et après, le snowboard, ça m'a amené à la montagne en fait. Ce qui m'a permis d'aller plus haut, je veux dire, sur le Mont Blanc, Tacul, tout ça. Pour aller faire de la nouvelle trace. Le snowboard extrême, pour moi, c'est comme le ski. Ça part du moment où t'as plus le droit à l'erreur. La nuance avec le freeride s'arrête là, je pense. Le freeride, c'est plutôt ski hors piste, parce qu'on a fait ce que tout le monde a fait à Chamonix depuis bientôt 30 ans, même plus. Mais tu peux, t'as encore une droit à l'erreur, c'est plus freeride hors piste, t'as le droit de tomber. Après, à l'extrême, à mon avis, c'est un deck au point de vue, si tu tombes, t'arrives en bas, quoi. Si t'arrives en bas, c'est pas bien.
T'es en pizza en bas, quoi.
c'est juste une question de concentration en fait. Faut être le bon jour au bon moment pour les conditions de la face, et il faut être au bon jour et au bon moment pour les conditions psychologiques du gars qui va, c'est tout. Quand on parle de ski extrême ou de snowboard extrême, c'est que l'engagement est primordial. C'est-à-dire que là, t'arrives à un moment où c'est un peu comme un alpiniste ou en solo, je pense. C'est qu'il n'y a que toi qui est là pour assurer ta sécurité, donc soit tu le fais bien ou soit tu le fais pas, mais il faut assurer. Autrement, si t'assures pas, c'est cuit.
So I think I'll just summarize for those that could not understand what he was saying there is he was differentiating between extreme skiing and snowboarding and just like off-piste skiing and snowboarding, right? Is in Chamonix, it's been going around for decades. That's like the birthplace of mountaineering and obviously ski mountaineering. And what he was trying to point out is, well, if you fall when you're off-piste skiing, are you going to die, right? And so he was really delineating that what he was engaging in, extreme snowboarding is you make a mistake, you die. And not like, oh, I might break a leg, or I could break my shoulder, my clavicle or something, like you will die. And so he really embraced that and understood that from the get-go. He used to, in the summertime, his family had a campground that I stayed in actually the first summer I started doing the research, and he used to make ramps, like you would see like skateboard ramps. He would do that in the yard of his campground, and what he would do is he would get on a snowboard and he would make it at 50, 60, 70 degrees, and he would see how steep he could stand on a snowboard before he would just fall, right? And so he was always testing himself to find out, like, how steep can I snowboard? How steep can I do this? And so he was always tinkering and playing, but he knew from a very young age that the things that he was doing, he was by himself. So when people criticized him that he disappeared and he didn't have radio communication, what does it really matter? If something happened to him on the north face of Mount Everest, no one was going to get to him. He might as well have been on the moon. And he knew that, and he was very committed to all of his climbs. And the things he was doing in Chamonix, if something happened to him, he always told his father, he's like, Dad, if something happens to me, they're going to have to pick me up from the bottom, right? So this was kind of the mentality, and this is what that clip was talking about, was that he understood very much like off-piste skiing at the ski area is one thing, but extreme snowboarding is another. And I think you saw some of those clips because you never know the snow conditions, and he talks about later that everybody's a pro in powder. But what about when you go from a 20-foot cliff to this, to concrete, to ice? I mean, he was a master, of not just his tools, but of all aspects of snowboarding. And I think the one thing, too, is you saw some of those climbing clips, and I don't know, Ellen will probably be able to talk more about this, is he never seemed to me what I heard of that they said, we only worry about Marco going up. Once he gets to the top, we don't worry about him going down. He wasn't like a really smooth climber necessarily. He charged up mountains. And that was like its own kind of beauty, is that how fast he would go. But he was completely self-taught. He was completely self-taught in the mountains, how to use ice axe, how to use crampons, rope work, and all that. So this next clip is just, it's 2022, so you probably see this in Teton Gravity Research and Mastic Productions every single, winter. But if you can put yourself in the mid to late 90s, some of this footage is fairly rare in how it was procured and taken. And a lot of times Marco would not let people photograph him, just let his friends video him and photograph him. So this just kind of is a little bit of a clip just showing his riding style. Because clearly when you're doing extreme skiing and snowboarding, it's a little herky-jerky. It's not always smooth. But I think one thing I really wanted to emphasize here is that he was a very graceful, smooth snowboarder. And his sister, Valerie, his oldest sister, told me in our first conversation that once he got put on a snowboard, it was like God made snowboarding just for Marco, is kind of what she said, is that it was almost like snowboarding and Marco were made, for one another, and that it was like a ballet, it was like a dance. So this next is just a series of clips just showing him just his snowboarding style that's not doing the most extreme stuff, just general snowboarding. And I'm sorry, there's no subtitles, so you should be able to follow along okay. Okay, so yeah, it just kind of shows the type of aggressive rider, and I know we're starting to get a little tight on time, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to show you the making history. This is his Everest descent in 2001. So this is the original footage of him snowboarding out the summit of Mount Everest, and he made a complete descent. It should be noted that his birthday is May 22nd, and he summited on May 23rd, and he was crushed by that, and he was crushed by it for a couple reasons. Dates were really important to Marco. They were only in his own mind. He did things on certain dates just because it was like a game to him. Well, on that climb, he found out there was an Austrian snowboarder named Dr. Stefan Gatt, that he actually brought his snowboard, and his expedition was on a little more aggressive and just a little more in front of him, and actually summited on his birthday. And he thought a dream was over, that, oh my gosh, I've done all this. I thought I was going to be the first person in the world to snowboard off Everest, and I was going to do it on my birthday. And not only am I not going to do it on my birthday, someone else is going to do it on my birthday. And he was crestfallen, I guess is the nicest word. He was crushed. But what he found out at the high camp was Dr. Gatt, to his credit, he did not use oxygen, and that's a real distinction people want to talk about, is Marco used oxygen to climb. Dr. Gatt did not, but he did have to take off his snowboard a lot during his descent, so he did not get credited with the complete descent from summit to camp like Marco did. So when Marco found that out, bing, like all of a sudden, the smile came back, the Gap 2 smile, and he climbed, and obviously the rest is history. And so this is his historic 2001 Everest descent. He's in purple here. What I'll say is this is all in English. You'll hear Russell Bryce. The key difference, I think, between the 2001, 2002 expeditions is Russell was helping him, like spotting him and talking to him and saying, go left, go right, and clearly that helped him on this descent. And he did not have that luxury in 2002. But here's some pretty rare footage of Marco becoming the first person to make a complete descent. And Ellen's on this ridge, on this one little point you'll see probably. You won't know it's her, but she's there. Another thing I should tell is, as he came down from the summit, his binding broke. And that should have been a cue, maybe like, go ahead and just abandon this, Marco. You don't have to make this snowboard descent. But he actually had his Sherpas use some baling wire and fix the binding. And then he continued on and made history after that. So that shows you a little bit about his bravado and confidence.
Après quelques virages, une lanière de sa fixation cède. La venue d'un Sherpa lui permet de réparer et de poursuivre sa trajectoire.
It's very thin there, Marco. Go straight across, Marco. Straight across to get to that snow slope right on the edge. Just this piece of rock in front of you, and then it's clear after that, over. Marco, you think you make abseil there, or you try to go to your left?
Okay, copy. Let's go 4 meters down.
Well done, man. Now much more easy for you. Much more easy after this, huh? What do you think about snowboarding from summit of Everest?
It's not easy, huh?
Yeah.
It's difficult. And I'm happy to have a good team and good boss for catch me at the bottom and go in my tent. Now it's difficult. Huh? I don't know, maybe it's the first time I go, but all time is hard, I think. But
so you got down through the rock band without abseil?
yeah, because it's good. Not so much no, but it's okay a little bit. And it's for the Sloven. He told me it's not possible to go down in spring season. The Great Couloir.
But you proved them wrong.
Voilà.
So that's obviously a quick interview, exhausted, coming down for 2001. I think that's a pretty critical point. You saw like when he's going down that cliff band and kind of pinballing down. It doesn't look like much, but that was about a 60-foot cliff and at about like 60 degrees. And Russell Bryce thought he was going to set up a rappel and just rappel down that section. But Marco was a purist, and it was really important for him not to rappel because it was like an ethic sometimes to backcountry skiing and snowboarding. And I just say that because it kind of clues you in. If you do end up getting the book and reading about it, kind of ties into my theory that, you know, nothing Marco did was by accident, and how he behaved on previous climbs usually dictated what he did on the next climb. And I don't, whatever happened to him on December 8, 2002, I really don't think that he stopped to set up a rappel as well. I'll just kind of say that when it comes to the Hornbein Couloir. So what I'm going to do now is, because we're getting close to the Q&A, I just want to throw I have a slideshow of just some photos of Marco, and to some music, and then we'll open up to a little Q&A. And I just think the most important thing is, as you watch these pictures, I think the most important thing I want to get across about Marco is, yes, you see the athletic ability and what he did, but he was somebody's brother, and he was somebody's son, and he was somebody's boyfriend. And even though he was ultra talented and a little brash at times, he was a very caring individual, and there was many sides to Marco. And it's hard to really encapsulate him in this like hour and a half long presentation, but I try to do the most I can with some of these pictures at the end here. So I'm gonna go back to slideshow mode and go quickly through them, because I talked about the technical difficulties. And then we'll just see some final images of Marco and his life, kind of encapsulating from beginning to end. And then we'll open it up to question and answer, okay? Okay. So I just wanted to show the photo video credits. Obviously, none of this would be possible. Sorry. Like I said, I'm very bad at this. None of this would be possible without his friends and family. And the video is by Bertrand. You know, he made a great film, Étoile Filante, which means shooting star. And you can find that on Amazon. It's a little bit rare, but there's an English subtitle version if you're interested. He was great in helping me. And then the images were by Rene Robert, a friend of Marco's. And then obviously his family owns a lot of his photos at this point. So that concludes kind of the visual aspect of the presentation. Certainly, like I said, this is my first one, so I don't know how good I did in painting the picture of Marco, but I wanted to bring Ellen back up here to ask a couple questions, and maybe we can provide a little more color through those, and then we'll open it up to you all if you have any questions about Marco as well.
I must say I'm a bit touched. You've done such a beautiful job honoring his life, so thank you so much. So I have some questions for you. You're still in contact with other people that go to Everest, that are still on the lookout. Mm-hmm. Are you still hopeful that something will be found?
Well, yeah, so this is tough. Russell Bryce, who obviously led the search for many years afterwards, if you read the book, he'll become a central figure to everything. And he's as smart as you'll find in the world on the north side of Everest. And he said to me that he was actually happy in many ways that he did not find a body because it makes things a lot tidier, right? Well, I can tell you that Russell also said, because Russell was not supportive of Marco going back in 2002, but he knew he was so obsessed he was going to do it one way or the other, and so he tried to provide as much support as he could. And Marco had this idea in his head that someone was going to do it before him. And he kind of had a good reason for that, right? Because the previous year on his birthday, an Austrian snowboarder almost took his achievement, right? So, what's sad about it is that 20 years have gone by and nobody has skied or snowboarded the Hornbein Couloir. It still remains kind of the most cherry line for a cliche. Now, there are some people, I'm not going to give away too much, that are planning and plotting. It requires perfect conditions. But there were a couple climbers last spring during COVID. China really tightened its regulations. And I'm not going to name the climbers, but I try to go through and find out who's climbing the Hornbein Couloir every spring, because I don't think you're going to find anything from Marco in the post-monsoon, because there's just too much snow. But I do think my theory that will come across in the book, I think could be verified, confirmed, refuted in the spring if someone went through there. So there's going to be two climbers that went through there last spring, and they were well aware of the Marco story, and I just told them, hey, I know their family, they're getting older, they're a religious family, they really want closure on this. And they unfortunately did not make it. They weren't able to make an attempt at the climb, but I think they're going to try it again. And so every single spring I'm asking people, like, hey, if you go through the Hornbein, and if you see something, could you just let me know, or maybe let the family know, because, just out of respect for them, I just didn't want to write this book. There's only two people really that mattered to me when I wrote this book, what they thought. One was, first and foremost, Marco's family. And fortunately, they've been pretty congratulatory and thankful that I discuss their brother and their son with respect. The second one was Tom Hornbein, who lives in Estes Park, Colorado, and he really enjoyed the book too. So those are the two people that I really didn't want to make mad. So if I make anybody else mad, so be it. But those two have been kind of helpful. But I think when it comes to the clues, the only really way is that you go up in that couloir, because the technical aspects of that couloir make it such that you can only really know if you go in there. And there's only been about a handful of successful ascent expeditions through there, and about 10 people in the world that have been up there. And I talked to pretty much every single one for this book, and they are in awe of Marco, I can tell you that.
And I wanted to emphasize, and you guys could tell by a lot of the images, Marco is very unique. He had a personality. I think I told Jeremy in our interview, the word authenticity is tossed around pretty easily these days. Marco was authentic, like right off the bat. He didn't try to be any particular way, but he was just so unique. And I think I was one of the people, you said, Ellen, would it be believable that Marco could have succeeded, left the mountain, integrated into society somewhere, and one day he will return. And I thought to myself, just knowing Marco the way I know, that is entirely possible, and it would not surprise me if years from now Marco's like, "Hi guys, what's going on?" Because he was that unique, and that he had that wild side. But I think you've captured, the part that touched me about Marco was his very kind, loving. He was a sweet boy, you guys. He was a very sweet young man, and that's what I remember about him.
Yeah, obviously it's very romantic, this idea of slipping into society and disappearing, right? There's a lot of intrigue, and I think it's entirely possible, too. I didn't know him, obviously, on the level Ellen did. The only reason why I don't think that he would do it is he was a mama's boy. He was really a mama's boy, and I don't think he would do that knowing the pain and torturous reality if he did that to his mother. However, he did look at life a little bit differently, and so for him, okay, 20 years has gone by, but for him, that might be 2 weeks or something away. So certainly, without a body, we'll really never know, but that intrigue is out there, and I just think just if there was a personality that would try it, Marco would definitely try it.
He would push it. It'd be pushing the boundaries. I saw the way that he connected to the Tibetan people. We don't speak Tibetan. The Tibetans don't speak English. But, within hours, Marco is showing them his gear, and they had exchanged earrings and, really bonding with people. So he had that magnetic personality. But should we take some questions from the audience?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you both.
Yes,
so just raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone around, and it's okay if you want to pull your mask down to ask your question and then put it back up. Okay?
How long did it take him to snowboard down in 2001?
So in 2001, he left the summit pretty early because he got there early. He wanted to get going. In total, from summit to base, it took him about 4 hours. So that's the thing. You saw a clip over a couple minutes, but it's exhausting to make hop turns at 8,000 meters, 8,500 meters. And certainly he had to get all the way back down to advanced base camp at about 22,000 feet. So he was pretty exhausted when he got back. Ellen had a great story. All this radio communication was going on, and I'll let her say it.
I'm up there. It's still like freezing at Camp 2, coming down. Marco's down in base camp eating pizza and talking on the radio to us. And, we're up there. It took us 2 days to get down. It took him 4 hours to get down.
Oh, yeah, and I think there's a great little story about that, too. I think he was having beer and pizza for sure. But when everybody got back to base camp, he stopped what he was doing and went and gave hugs and congratulations. He really was humble and was just as happy for others on that expedition as himself. And that seems like maybe that's not that unique when I look at the audience here. But you got to remember, he's a 22-year-old. He's not a 42-year-old, not a 32-year-old. And he really was that humble character. He was really excited about the rest of the people on the expedition.
Yeah, and I can speak. I was one of 2 women on that expedition 20 years ago. Not many women were there. There's a lot of ego, a lot of male ego on big Himalayan expeditions. And let me tell you, my whole thing was I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and my head down and do my thing. But Marco just shattered that whole stereotype where he was just hugging people and loving people and yeah, way to go, and so very supportive, genuinely happy for the rest of us.
And made sure he said ladies first when it came to eat in the mess tent.
Yeah.
He made sure that ladies ate first.
He would make sure I got my plate of, he'd be like, hey everybody, and he'd, get all the guys to, stop serving yourselves. Ladies first. And he would make sure I got my plate of food first. It was so funny. And that was his parenting. I give his mom credit for that.
So this is a question for Ellen probably more. It's such an extraordinary story, and seeing those clips. But Ellen, what kind of Sherpa support did he have, and what did the Sherpas think about this endeavor?
Because Marco was so friendly and outgoing and loving, they loved him, Cheryl. He was also a competent, fast climber. So they also loved climbing. He was climbing with Pubatashi Sherpa, who Sangye probably knows. He's one of the strongest Sherpas in the Himalaya. And Pubatashi and Marco bonded very tightly, and I think they really enjoyed being with him. And I mean, let's face it, the rest of us Westerners are pretty slow. You know, we're pretty slow. We're recreationalists. We're there for, you know, our own. But Marco is competent and fast, and they really enjoyed his company. And I know that Pubatashi was devastated. I mean, I felt a level of devastation when I heard that Marco was lost, but Pubatashi shared 2 summits of Everest with him and supported him all along the way, and so incredibly strong support he had.
So I'm very curious why he didn't have the guidance that he had, in 2001, in 2002. What happened there?
Yeah, it's a great, and this is like the toughest part as a writer, I'll say. Clearly I'm a journalist at heart, and I have to write what I think may have happened, and I'm not trying to be an active critique, but if there is one critique of Marco's behavior in 2002 is that he was obsessed over, he was faster, he didn't acclimatize as much, he didn't wait for batteries, and he didn't wait for communication, but I think at that point, I mean, he did make phone calls with a satellite radio, sat phone, the night before he went, and then the batteries went dead. But they didn't have two-way communication, they didn't have two-way radio, he didn't wait for them to come up from base camp, because I think he just was committed. I think that's really what it was. But certainly, Russell Bryce was not a fan. When he got back from 2001, he sat down with his parents and said, "I'm going back." And the mom was devastated, like, "What do you mean you just snowboarded off Mount Everest? Why would you go back and do it again?" But he wanted to do the Hornbein Couloir. That was his intent in 2001, but it wasn't possible because of snow conditions. Russell Bryce had to be on a different mountain and could not be there with him, and he tried to convince Marco to wait until another time, another season, where he could be there, set up shop, where he could do the same thing, kind of help him navigate that mountain. But he wasn't having anything of it. And the thing about Marco, too, is he did work he was pretty self-sufficient when it came to his expeditions. He worked at the campground, cleaned toilets, mowed lawns at the family campground to pay for his climbs. He actually wrote grants to the municipality of Chamonix to get some of his stuff covered as well. But he started going to Everest and 8,000 meters, the price tag goes up. And his parents essentially started to like kind of advance him the money for work in the future, and he always did it when he got back, but it became like this overlapping, because he was always constantly gone to Asia. And Russell Bryce was not supportive of it, but he was really nervous that if he didn't, he was just going to get some other cheaper outfit, and at least he gave him, Purvatashi, so he had the best Sherpa in the world to help him, but certainly he was committed, he really was committed. And I think if that's one flaw, is that he ignored the weather patterns, he climbed it quicker, he took the first weather window, not the second or third. But at the end of the day, he got there twice in 2 years, and at that point, when he's sitting up there in the afternoon of September 8th, I don't think he's not gonna say no at that point. So clearly, with the communication, to me, the only thing that would do for him is if he got into trouble. Hey, I'm in trouble. You're never going to get to me by the time you, but at least I'm in trouble. But certainly looking now how it's kind of ripped apart his family a little bit and how emotional they got over this, at least they could have some closure, maybe some idea of what happened to him if there was some communication. But certainly that is something that he probably should have reconsidered. But that's just me as a journalist speaking. I'm not going into the mind of Marco.
Was your his first descent in May, and did he go back in September because he thought the snow would be better? That's an unusual time to be climbing there. Yeah, so May obviously is the spring season, more the dry season, and that's why he had to do the Norton or Great Couloir at that time. And he wanted to do the Hornbein, but it was like impossible, just a sheet of ice. So the plan was to go back in post-monsoon, in September, where the snow conditions would allow him to go down. And there were 2 Swiss climbers that gave him the idea that he could do this. Jean Troyer and Edhard Lortan, they made a rapid ascent and descent, and they had the speed record on Everest, and they did it in late August. In, I think it was 1988 or 86. And they actually slid down on their butts down the Hornbein Couloir. They climbed up it.
Well, there's two couloirs. There's the Hornbein and the Japanese, and that connects to make this descent Marco wanted to do. And then he got the confidence that you could do this because they climbed up it, and they slid on their butts back down to base camp. So he's like, well, if the Swiss can slide on their butts, I can certainly snowboard it. And I did talk to Jean Troyer, who lives in a nice village on the other side of the Mont Blanc Massif. And Marco called him, and Marco asked questions about the conditions that day and the conditions he faced, and if he had the same exact conditions, what would it be like? So again, he did talk to everybody who has been up there. But that was the reason why he went back in September, is there would be ample snow coverage for descent of that magnitude, yeah.
Anybody else?
You mentioned someone did find a snowboard, but whose was it? Or do you
have to read the book. Oh, you can't tell. Okay.
Well, what I'll just say when it comes to that is, was that? Repeat the question was, I mentioned that there was a Russian expedition team in 2003 and 4 that were up in that area in the North Face. In 2003, they were kind of on a reconnaissance mission, and then 2004 they actually put up the new route. Well, in 2003, during the reconnaissance, they looked out at about 17,500 feet on the edge of the glacier in an area called Tillman Meadows, and they saw what was a snowboard. And they were familiar with the Marco story, what happened the year before. And so I connected with this Russian climber, and he left me hanging for about 28 hours and said, oh, I actually have a picture of that snowboard. I'll send it to you. And of course, I couldn't even do anything for the next 28 hours. Like, my kids starved, my kids, well, I don't know what my kids did. And then he finally sent me the pictures and gave me some more background on it. So like Ellen said, I have to make you read the book. But it is a pretty intriguing aspect of the storyline that no one's talked about. Russell Bryce, everybody's been up there. That was the first they heard about it. And I just connected with this Russian climber, his team. And they're the ones that found the snowboard.
That's all he's going to say.
You guys talk a lot about oxygen, and I'm always curious with Everest. What is oxygen percentage at base camp?
Well, our advanced base camp on the north side is at 21,000 feet. That's home. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's low. On the south side, we're at about 18,000 feet, which is much more advantageous. So
I'm still trying to figure out, because I've heard, isn't it like oxygen content at that level, like 6% or something ridiculous?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, where we're climbing, up above 26,000 feet is the death zone.
Yeah.
Nothing lives up there. Nothing survives. Right. We're climbing on about 2 liters of oxygen per minute. So yeah, when things go wrong above 8,000 meters, they tend to go very, very wrong, and people can die very quickly. People still climb Everest without supplemental oxygen, and my hat's off to them. I personally I have small hands and feet, and I wanted to be more lucid. I wanted to make sure I was thinking as well as I could. I mean, we're all hypoxic up there, right? But I definitely never considered climbing without it. It's incredibly dangerous. So.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, a good little side note is Jeremy Jones, a snowboarder. I did talk to him because he did a descent in Nepal at about 22,000 feet, and he said he'll never go back and do it again. He said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. He couldn't imagine Marco hop turning at 29,000 feet, oxygen or no oxygen. He felt that every time he made a turn, his lungs were going to explode. So the physiological aspect of the climb, too, it's really difficult for me to put into words, even in the book, but I try. But certainly, yeah, the oxygen, and then it's heavy too, right? So it's a little cumbersome. It's not like, you're up on the mountain here at Vail. There's all sorts of things around. But certainly, Marco, there's a purist aspect too that, everybody's like, he used oxygen to climb up. So there's somehow that discounted his feat. And for him, that wasn't really what it was about. He just wanted to snowboard down it. And if that's what Russell Bryce told him he had to do to be on his expedition, he did it. And I think that's the important thing about Marco. He was respectful of people, and those that he respected, he listened to. And so if Russell Bryce thought it was safer for him to climb with oxygen and have it for a descent, then that's what he did, because that's, what he wanted to do. But he said he really struggled to snowboard with oxygen, so he had to take that mask off. Yeah.